Good evening, everybody, and welcome to our rally for socialism. We're just going to give everybody a minute or so to get into the Zoom, but whilst we're waiting, it would be really great if you could let us know where you're joining us from in the country in the chat. Okay. Okay, I think we're going to make a start. My name is Belle Ribeiro-Addy MP, and I'm the Member of Parliament for Streatham and co-chair of the Socialist campaign group. We're really pleased to welcome you all to this evening's rally. Thousands have registered right up and down the country, and hopefully we'll be finding out soon where everybody in the country is joining us from. We all know that we faced a very, very challenging time, particularly as the Labour Party, with a devastating defeat in Hartlepool and a crumbling vote share in councils in historic Labour heartlands. And these are all part of a wider trend. Now, we know that it's our task to reverse this trend, not to accelerate it. And that means really that we need a new strategy that recognises that for many of our voters, the choice sometimes isn't even Labour or Tory. It's a choice between voting Labour or not voting at all. We need to give people something to vote for. We need to give people something to campaign for. We need to have a progressive offer, 21st century socialism that inspires activists to get out onto the doorstep and inspires voters to get to that ballot box. And we need to have a party that listens to people right up and down the country, a party that respects all of its members and, is really, really rooted in our policies and not ashamed of the socialism that we hope, to one day be running this country with. This country needs a Labour government. It needs one more than ever. And we've seen that coming out of the pandemic. We've seen that with the decimation and the austerity over the past 10 years. And we know that that's something that we can deliver if we have the right policies, if we take the time to reflect on what these results have shown us and what it means for the future. And that's why I'm so proud of the Socialist campaign group. And I'm so proud to introduce to you all of these speakers that come from our group, all of these people that give me hope. For all of you, and I've heard this said so many times, particularly over the past year or so, how people are feeling quite despondent and that sometimes, quite disappointed with the Labour Party. There are fantastic members right throughout the Labour Party, and you are going to get to hear from some of them tonight. Those members that, fly that red flag, stand up for socialism and continue to represent the very best values of our Labour Party. And I'm not going to talk anymore. I'm going to quickly go to our first speaker. And he needs very, very little introduction. He is known as the People's Chancellor, but he's also known more generally as John McDonnell MP. John.
Thanks, Belle. Apologies to everyone. I've got to speak and then head off because in my constituency tonight, I'm chairing a meeting of residents from a tower block owned by a company called Ballymore, and it's a company that is failing to address the safety issues. And in Epsana Begum's constituency at the weekend, the same company had a tower block which went up in flames. And I've got very many literally terrified residents and constituents who are worried. And yet again, we've seen nothing from the government this week about making sure the cladding issue is addressed. And again, what is happening is these are private companies making huge profits for their shareholders and putting my constituents and thousands of others at risk of their lives. Let me just say, first of all, no meeting of socialists can take place at the moment without us expressing solidarity with the Palestinian people. And let's be clear, I've listened to some of the statements in Parliament and elsewhere as though there was some equivalence between what's going on, between what the Israeli actions and Palestinian actions. Let's be clear. The current wave of strikes that are killing men, women, and many children by Israeli planes has been caused, this dispute has been caused, let's go through it. First of all, by the Israeli state evicting people from their homes illegally. Secondly, the invasion with mortars of the Al-Aqsa Mosque during the holy month of Ramadan. And again, the attempt by right-wing extremist Israelis to try and march through, again, interrupting religious ceremonies. The bombs that are shattering down on Gaza at the moment are being perpetrated by who? But let's be clear, let's be honest about it. They're being perpetrated by a state that has imprisoned the Palestinians within Gaza and is abusing human rights, not just now, but on a daily basis over the years. This is a state that's been condemned by the Human Rights Watch as an apartheid state, and it is. So we stand in solidarity with the Palestinian people. And I hope many of you will be joining the demonstrations this weekend in solidarity with the Palestinians. But let me give you this warning as well. In the Queen's speech yesterday, the Tories are introducing legislation which will prevent sanctions, boycotts. They're introducing legislation which will prevent us actually taking action against the Israeli state, which could actually ensure that we could force upon them some form of peace and just settlement in the future. And again, we'll be able to have to demonstrate against that. But the police and crime bill is still coming through, and the government will seek to ensure that they legislate to criminalise all of us that take place in those demonstrations. So again, what we've got to do is not just express solidarity with the Palestinians, but make sure that we're supporting all those campaigning against this attack on civil liberties and human rights within our own country. And talking of solidarity, I want to make this second point. From the Socialist Campaign Group, we stand in absolute solidarity with Jeremy Corbyn, and we demand the restoration of the whip to Jeremy. It is outrageous that the former leader of our Labour Party, who's given his life to this movement, has had the whip withdrawn. We want that reinstated. But in addition to that, we also want to ensure that all those members who have been suspended purely and simply because they wanted to discuss in their branch or their constituencies Jeremy's case, that when no action was taken against them, we want that lifted and then brought back into the party. Final point really is the one that Bell has raised already. We lost Hartlepool, and yes, there does need to be a post-mortem on what happened there and lessons need to be learned. But one of the issues is, first of all, no more imposition of parachuted in candidates. Let local members decide who their candidates are. Secondly, the point that Bell made is we lost because the Labour vote never turned up. They never turned out. They turned out in 2017 and 2019, and we won the election in Hartlepool under Jeremy Corbyn. This time round, people, Labour voters, literally didn't come out because they didn't know what they were voting for. They did not know what the Labour Party policy programme is because there is none at the moment. What we've got to do now, recognise that the Labour leadership has announced a policy review. Our job now is to make sure in that policy review, it isn't just a matter of maintaining the policies of 2017 and 2019 manifestos, as actually Keir Starmer was elected on a 10-point plan to do. Actually, we need much more radical policies now. We're facing the existential threat of climate change rushing towards us. What we need now is to ensure that we have the policies to meet that existential threat. And in that way, we can inspire people again. We can motivate Labour people to come out and vote for us. But we'll only do that, and I'll make this final point, Bell. We can only win the party to those policies if you're a member of the Labour Party. Jeremy and I and others have made it clear. This coming struggle within the Labour Party, both in terms of the policy platform, but also for the selection of the candidates, the restoration of democracy to our constituency parties, and throughout our movement, can only be won if we maintain and enhance our membership. This is not a time to leave the Labour Party. In fact, this is a time to join the Labour Party, because this coming struggle will be a struggle about the soul and the future of our party. So stay with us or join us and be with us in this campaign to ensure this party is a socialist party and wins the next election on a socialist programme. Solidarity.
Thank you very much, John, and you're absolutely right. We are nothing without our members. And it's such a shame to see people leaving the party. As a membership-led party, the greater we are, the greater our voices, in number we are, the greater our voices will be. So I am so pleased to introduce our next speaker to you. And you know, one of the great things about the Socialist campaign group of MPs is they are from right across the country, as I've said. So we're going from John McDonnell and Hayes and Harlington all the way up to Rebecca Long-Bailey in Salford.
Yay, Salford. Thanks, Belle. If you offer nothing, if you don't show how you lift those people up who are the foundation of this country, then you lose trust in the electorate that you have any inclination at all to build an economy that works for them. And sadly, we went into the recent local elections and the Hartlepool elections with little to offer other than suits, focus groups and slogans. But amidst this policy vacuum, however, we had a few places that bucked the trend. Wales, Preston, Greater Manchester, and where I'm sitting tonight, Salford. In Salford, we kept all of our council seats. We won seats that we've never held before from the Tories, and our mayor, Paul Dennett, increased his vote share from 49% to 59%. So the question the party should be asking is what happened in Salford? Now, I'll tell you what happened in Salford. We chose our path, and that path was socialism. And as our mayor, Paul Dennett, has said, the centre ground no longer exists as it once did. The public now expects us to pick a side and articulate a bold, ambitious and progressive vision for the future that tackles poverty, inequality, and expects us to place the needs of working people and families at its core. And that's what our councillors did in Salford along with Paul, a bold council house building programme, insourcing public services, demanding better rates of pay and terms and conditions across the city, as well as encouraging cooperatives, mutuals, social enterprises and small businesses. And they embraced our trade union movement and grassroots campaigners. They celebrated them. They celebrated our radical and industrial history and all the struggles that came with it, because that history makes us proud as Salfordians. We invested in the arts, media, logistics and manufacturing. And all those years ago, when our Labour stalwarts here in Salford had the idea of buying the derelict docks and turning it into what they called at the time a Silicon Valley and media centre for the UK, they were laughed at. But who's laughing now, where we've got Media City and we're the fastest growing city in the UK? And all of this was done despite national government cutting our core funding by over 50% since 2010. So we won in Salford last week because we had a socialist economic vision. We rejected the ideas that Labour's real problem was not playing the Westminster game well enough, because we knew that our success was rooted in building trust with our community and providing the answers to the real problems that people faced. And we knew that we had to set out a vision that met the aspirations of Salfordians for real economic change. And we stood up for our people. We attacked the government for trampling on these aspirations. We didn't collaborate with them. So what do we do now? Do we sit back and lament the demise of such groundbreaking policies within the party, as there's a steady flow of commentators and yesterday's men doing the media rounds and telling us that we need to reconstruct the party, to break the union link, to lurch rightwards and cut oxygen from our socialist agenda? No, because we know that these economic policies are popular. We know they resonate, and we know that as Labour members, our sole purpose is to deliver an economic model that lifts everyone up and displays the equitable distribution of wealth, opportunity and power in our society. Now, Salford Labour knew this. They got their messaging right and they built their brand. It was a council that cares for residents, a council where people come before profit, a council that looks after its environment, and a council that builds an economic model designed to benefit every one of us. And I just want to end on this quote. We're trying to construct a more inclusive society. We're going to make a country in which no one is left out. They were the words of Franklin D. Roosevelt as he began setting out one of the biggest economic rebuilding programs that the Western world has ever seen. And just as he never gave up on his economic vision, neither can we give up on ours. And as John said, there is a battle ahead, and that battle will determine, quite frankly, whether the Labour Party exists or ceases to exist forever. And to make sure that we push forward that socialist economic agenda, you've got to be a member of the Labour Party, because there's no point trying to kick from the outside in. That's futile. The only way to change things is to kick things from the inside out. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Becky. And you're absolutely right to remind everybody of some of the fantastic results we did have and what the difference was in terms of what people were offering locally. The idea that socialist principles and policies are lost to the public is simply not true. And some of the real big successes that we saw right across the country proved that. Now, we have got people on the call from everywhere, from Hackney to Wimbledon. We've got people from Ashton, Bristol, Corby, Ealing, Hemsworth, Clonelly, Manchester, Norwich, Poole, Scarborough, Southampton, Stoke, Sunderland, Tunbridge Wells, and Woolwich, and Streatham, where I am. But our next speaker is from Gateshead. He's the Member of Parliament for Gateshead, fantastic co-chair of the Socialist Campaign Group, Ian Mearns MP.
Thanks very much indeed, Belle. And I would say at the outset, it's my absolute privilege to co-chair the Socialist Campaign Group with yourself, and it's my privilege to have that position. And I think that one of the things that we really must do is remind people about what they've lost under 11 years of Conservative government, because one of the sadnesses of my time in Parliament for these 11 years since I was elected in 2010 is that in 11 years, I've watched a Tory government systematically dismantle everything that I spent the last 27 years before that trying to build when I was a councillor and ended up being deputy leader of the council in Gateshead. And just watching them systematically dismantle that. And people, they kind of take it for granted. Oh, yes, we know we've had cuts. But when people actually have it explained to them what those cuts have amounted to, they don't realise. I mean, I've spoken to local government correspondents of major press outlets, and they've got no idea about the depths of the cuts which have taken place. I was talking to a Times correspondent just last week and explained to her that in 2010, when I ceased to be the deputy leader of the council in Gateshead and became the MP, that we actually had an annual revenue budget in Gateshead of £310 million. That was in 2010. Now, in 2021, the same council has an annual revenue budget of just over £200 million. So we've lost £110 million. But when you add inflation into that, you can probably say that the council in real terms has had its budget cut in half. And people wonder why we can't deliver the services as the great council that Gateshead used to be back in 2010. We still have a good council. They still try an awful lot, but it's no surprise that we can't do anywhere near the sort of things that we were able to do back then because of those cuts inflicted upon us directly by those successive Tory councils. And in my work over the last 11 years as a member of the Education Select Committee, I've actually witnessed how those cuts have impacted worst on children. And the impact on children started almost straight away. And the sort of cuts which, several different government departments have made, but which have impacted on children, only, you have to be reminded about exactly what's been going on. Let's not forget one of the first cuts to be implemented by the Tory government in 2010 was a little program called the Health in Maternity Grant. And that was for actually looking after expectant mothers and their unborn children. So health and maternity grants were cut, and Sure Start centres were pared back and pared back and pared back, so that, you know, many of the Sure Start centres built around the country, hundreds of them, no longer exist, no longer have the physical buildings or the staff to support them. Something that the government are coming to rue now, because they're worried about children falling through cracks in the system and going missing. Well, there was a programme called Contact Point, which had been developed in pilot stage and was ready for rollout by the last Labour government, but which was just done away with. Contact Point, which would have prevented those youngsters going missing from the system altogether. The 2-child cap on benefits, you know, on child support benefits, you know, just simply dreadful. And we've seen lots of services like youth and community services slashed. So really good youth and community services like we used to have in Gateshead now just virtually no longer exist. And then other small niche programs like Play Builder, which was about repairing and renewing play equipment in our parks and public spaces. Creative Partnerships, which is about giving youngsters a different life experience in school, so they could experience cultural activity and sporting activity. School sports partnerships, which were pared back dramatically to about a third of what had existed before. The Aim Higher programme, which was about helping youngsters from poorer backgrounds to get into higher education. And of course, educational maintenance allowance, which helped those post-16 students to go on into FE and into sixth form and supported them financially to do so. It also incentivised them to do their coursework and to attend on a regular basis. And even then, when youngsters got to university, we saw tuition fees trebled to £9,000. And what have we also seen? Those other cuts which have impacted upon the lives of children in housing, in libraries, in leisure, in swimming pools, all of those things and many more, which have had a detrimental impact on the lifestyle and life chances of our children. And what have we also seen develop at the same time? A fragmented education system with so many different types of schools in so many different places, and accountability at almost zero, particularly with the academies, free schools, university technical colleges. And of course, let's not forget, we still have something like 160 grammar schools throughout our country. And while all of those cuts have impacted on children, we've also seen the Tories, you know, reverting to type, actually, and implementing pork barrel politics of the worst kind, using taxpayers' money to bolster the political positions of their elected officials. And this is a form of corruption and needs to be called out as such. The only need that they are addressing, it would seem to me, is the need to get their councillors, to get their mayors, to get their MPs re-elected, and they're using public funds to secure that. Absolutely and utterly corrupt practice. So what do we need to do? Well, I tell you what we don't need to do, sit back and do nothing. And we need to fight in such a way that is meaningful and not just shouting from the sidelines. The Labour Party needs to be reclaimed by ordinary working people for whom it was actually established. It was established by ordinary working people in the trade unions to fight the corner of ordinary working people. So what do we need to do? We need to agitate. We need to get the message out there. We need to educate, and we need to organise. The old thing, agitate, educate, organise. We need to fight back. We need to stick together, solidarity, comrades, and reverse those cuts and kick the Tories out and build a future of hope for our children and young people.
Thank you very much, Ian, and thank you for reminding us exactly what we've lost these past 10 years and what we need to do to get it back. Thank you. So our next speaker and you're going to hear me say this a few times. That's another great thing about the Socialist Campaign Group. We have a lot of the new intake in of Labour MPs and Socialist Campaign Group. So one of the stars of the new intake, she is from Lozells. I'm not sure exactly where in the Midlands that is, but I've been told not to mess with people from there. Her name is Zara Sultana, and she is the Member of Parliament for Coventry South. Zara.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Belle. Absolutely, do not mess with anyone from Lozells. Hi everyone, my name is Zara Sultana. I'm proudly the Member of Parliament for Coventry South, and I'm so proud to be speaking on this panel today alongside my closest friends and inspiring comrades. And I'd like to just begin by paying tribute to those colleagues, and especially to Jeremy, to Diane, and to John, who have always inspired me, and they continue to inspire me. I've only been in Parliament for a short amount of time, but in that short amount of time, I guess Belle and others will also agree with me. We've seen the pressure there is on MPs to keep your head down, to not speak about injustice, and to know that those guys have always stood up for the oppressed. That is a constant source of inspiration. So thank you, Jeremy, thank you, Diane, and thank you, John. And let me echo some of John's sentiments earlier, that Jeremy absolutely should have the whip restored immediately, and members who have been unfairly suspended should also be readmitted. This evening, as we are here together, I can't help but think of the Palestinian people. In the last few days, Israeli airstrikes have forced people in the West Bank Israeli airstrikes have rained down in Gaza, one of the most densely populated places on earth, killing at least 53 people, including many children. In the West Bank and in East Jerusalem, we have seen families who have been forced to flee their homes in the Nakba 73 years ago, again in the neighborhood of Sheikh Jarrah in particular, are facing forced expulsion by Israeli settlers. And then at the Al-Aqsa Mosque, we have seen Palestinians who came to pray during the holy month of Ramadan brutally attacked with bullets and grenades used against peaceful worshippers. In the UK, we have a special responsibility to be speaking out for the rights of Palestinians. After all, it was a British government who issued the Balfour Declaration in 1917. It was a British government that, as the mandatory power after the Second World War, suppressed the Palestinian demand for self-determination. And it is a British government today that still sells arms worth hundreds of millions of pounds to the Israeli army. So we cannot be silent. We have to be loud, and we have to be super clear that what is happening to the Palestinian people are war crimes. The settlements are illegal. The occupation is illegal. And the siege in Gaza is a brutal crime. In our solidarity, let us show the Palestinian people will never be alone in their struggle for liberation. Politics for me is about principles. It's about mobilizing power and for people to see those principles enacted. That's what the Labour Party should be about. It needs to be clear and unashamed in standing up for the Labour movement, in standing up for internationalism and for our socialist values. But in the past year, too often people don't know what our party stands for or whose interests we're fighting for. Too often the leadership has seemed far more enthusiastic about going after the left and party members than going after the Tories and the super rich. Last week, we saw the disastrous results of that strategy. In Hartlepool, we had nearly half the number of votes that we did in 2019. And from getting 52% of the vote in 2017, this time we were down nearly 25 points, nearly halving our vote share in just a few years. It's not about the Brexit Party, it's not about UKIP. They stood in 2017. It's about what the party is offering and whose side people think it's on. So we need to make that clear. We need a Labour Party that isn't just talking about competence or being forensic or thinks that flags are the answer, but instead offers the policies and the vision that meets the needs and the aspirations of people. And we have that ready-made. The polling shows it. People support higher taxes on the rich. They back public ownership on things like rail and mail. They want the minimum wage to be a real living wage, and they want our nurses to have a proper pay rise that's not 1 or 2%. It's 15%, a real pay rise for a decade of lost pay. And friends, more than anything, with the climate emergency before us, we know that this isn't a time for moderation. It's not a time for tinkering around the edges. It's time for ambition that meets the scale of the challenges we face. And that's what a People's Green New Deal does. It's a program of economic transformation to build a country that not only averts the climate crisis, but one that works for the many, not just the few. It's a program designed and discussed by trade unionists and think tanks, activists and policy experts that would create millions of well-paid, skilled, unionized green jobs by a mass investment in green technologies, expanding and electrifying public transport, creating a national care service, retrofitting the country's homes, cutting costs and carbon, and so much more. From an economy that is being run for profit of the wealthy few, we need a society that works for the needs of the many. Throughout the last year, we've seen a lot of things. And one of the things that we really did see that it's not millionaire bankers or hedge fund managers who keep us going. It's nurses, it's cleaners, it's teachers, it's shop assistants, it's taxi drivers, it's bus drivers. It's our working class in all of its diversity. And with the People's Green New Deal, we can truly build a society run by and for them. And alongside comrades in the Socialist campaign group, that's what we're fighting for in Parliament. And that's what we're fighting with you collectively too. So thank you so much in solidarity.
Thank you very much, Zara. So I've been told now, and I can see that we have 2,000 people watching on this Zoom and many more on the various streams that we've got going. So that's absolutely fantastic. I'm going to go quickly on to our next speaker, who is another star of the 2019 intake, the new intake, and he's Ian Byrne MP from Liverpool West Derby.
Thanks, Belle, and greetings of solidarity to everybody watching. And it's a real honour, quite humble to be on this panel tonight with such great comrades, and I'm extremely proud to be a member of the Socialist campaign group. And we've had some fantastic contributions about what's actually happening in the party, but I wanted to concentrate my contribution on the importance of community organising. And I want to touch on how, when it's embedded into communities, it can affect change, empower real change and empower communities. And without this, I firmly believe we will struggle to regain power for a long, long time, and Hartlepool will remain in Tory hands. And a tangible example of this is what we've actually done in Liverpool. So 6 years ago, 3 socialists and trade unionists, and I apologise to Peter Mandelson for uttering such profanities, started fan support on food banks, a wheelie bin outside Goodison, in a response about the food poverty that was happening in our communities. Liverpool and Everton fans come together to form a grassroots community movement. So from these humble beginnings, we have grown into a national network. And a huge victory happened in October last year when the Premier League and the broadcasters, in their ultimate wisdom, decided to start charging for football, which originally was being free to air during the COVID pandemic. And collectively we come together, Newcastle, Manchester, City, United, Leeds, Liverpool, Everton, to challenge the greed of the Premiership and the broadcasters. Within a month, they reversed that decision to charge for football, which was free to air, as I said. That was 6 years of building from, as I said, the wheelie bin outside Goodison, building a national network, embedding organising, community organising, socialist values into communities and coming together collectively to challenge the status quo and win a major victory, one of the great victories of fan activism, which benefited millions of people throughout this country. Now, behind me, you can see the campaign for the right to food. And this is another example of what can be achieved with collective community organising. And the original aim, when I was elected in Parliament in 2019 on that fantastic manifesto, and the right to food was actually in the manifesto, was to keep it in the next manifesto. That was the idea behind the campaign, to go into Parliament, keep it on the agenda, keep the evils of what we're seeing in our communities with millions of people suffering from food poverty. That was the original aim. But then we switched when we heard about the National Food Strategy, which was the ability to put the right to food into legislation without waiting for the general election. And from October to where we are now in April, we've had councils from Durham to Brighton declaring themselves right to food areas with motions put through by councillors and activists. We've had combined authorities, city regions doing the same. We had Metro mayors, and we had Andy Byrne, Steve Rodham, putting it in their manifestos, and who both won stonking majorities, I'll have to say. But the beauty of the campaign is that it unites many, many different elements. So we've had faith leaders, business leaders, grassroots organisations like Momentum, Acorn, Land Workers Alliance, supporting the campaign. And as I said, it united the football world with support from football clubs, Liverpool, Everton, but also Kenny Dalglish, Marcus Rashford. And we've had magnificent support from the Bakers Union, Unite, and we're having meetings with the National Education Union in the next couple of weeks. But underpinning it is a grassroots movement, which is fan support and food banks, a network of activists, community activists who want to achieve systemic change, who want to rip away the stick and plaster, and they want systemic change. If we harness this collective of what I've just mentioned, the many different segments of society in the push for social and economic justice, then we win. Not just elections, but a country and a society that we can be proud of for generations to come. And that's what so many who are commentating at the moment, they have no concept of. And they're forgetting that it's 2021. It's not 1995. We have Johnson, not Major. And the ground has shifted, and so have the challenges. So our communities need socialism. The labour movement needs socialism. It needs our energy, it needs our ideas, and it needs our vision to change a society which, as I mentioned earlier, is leaving millions in poverty. 15 million people in this country at the moment are in poverty. And I firmly believe that's how you win an election. You offer a vision of hope. And I firmly believe that only socialism achieves this. And that is what the Labour Party needs to recognise, and recognise quite quickly. So solidarity to everybody on the call, and keep the flag of socialism flying. Thank you, Belle.
Thank you, Ian, and what a great way to wrap up. Keep that flag of socialism flying. Thank you very much. So we're going on to our next speaker, another star of the 2019 intake. She's called the baby of the house, but she is a seasoned socialist. Her name is Nadia Whittome, MP, and she's from Nottingham East. Nadia.
Thank you so much, Belle, and it's a real honour to be following on from Comrade Ian Byrne, who's just done the most fantastic grassroots organising in Liverpool, and to be sharing a platform with comrades from the Socialist campaign group. Before I say anything else, I want to start by expressing my solidarity with the people of Palestine, because our socialism does not stop at Britain's borders. They're fighting against illegal forced evictions, against obscene brutality that we saw at Al-Aqsa Mosque at the hands of Israeli forces, and against airstrikes in Gaza that have killed women, men, and many children too. Comrades, this year has been a difficult one for us as a movement and as a country. 155,000 people over 150,000 people have died because of the Tories' failings. People have lost their family, lost their friends, lost their jobs, their whole lives. And while nurses, doctors, care workers like my former colleagues in Nottingham and countless other frontline workers have been risking their lives, the Tories and their mates have been stuffing their pockets with public money. In that context, Labour should have stormed these elections, but we failed to hold the government to account. and we fail to give people a vision to vote for. And that can't be blamed on the pandemic. My generation has grown up under austerity. I've grown up mainly under Tory governments. And I can tell you that we are sick of low-paid precarious work. We're sick of paying 2/3 of our wages on rent to line the pockets of landlords. But in the last 4 years, under Jeremy Corbyn, thousands of young people were drawn to the Labour Party. And that's because we were finally promised the kind of deep structural transformative change that our generation and our society has been crying out for. But these last elections, the local elections, show just how quickly that support can be lost. It can be lost when we're insulted, when we're patronised, when we're taken for granted. That's when young people will either stay at home or they'll vote for other parties like the Greens. We, young people, are the future. We're also the present, and our party would do well to remember that. So instead of denouncing us as woke social media warriors, Labour should be building a vision that reaches across the generations, that appeals to our material interests of working class people in our diverse communities. And that core offer should be an economic transformation of the country. It should be driven by a pioneering Green New Deal, the one that was developed by our very own Becky Long-Bailey, alongside activists and trade unionists and policy experts. Because people want to know exactly how their lives will improve from day one with Labour, and exactly how they will be empowered. So, for example, in the last election in 2019, we could say to people in Redcar, for example, that we will invest capital here locally to create over 1,000 jobs in a recycled steel plant. And that is a tangible thing that people can grasp. And nothing so detailed or credible has been produced in the last year. But we've got it all in our last two manifestos, which were proved to be popular. And when people ask us how we'll pay for our plans, we should be clear about that. The richest will pay. We would implement a wealth tax and invest that money into our communities. And on the culture war, we must make this point again and again. Our enemy is not migrants or trans people or young people. It's exploitative bosses, dodgy landlords, and the super rich. We will never out-Tory the Tories on social conservatism. And to even try to do that is a betrayal of swathes of the working class that we're supposed to represent. And what's more, it wouldn't even work. Talking tough on immigration and tough on crime and the causes of crime, or rolling back trans rights, that just feeds the Tories' rhetoric, while at the same time alienating that broad coalition that we need to build. We can't sit out that culture war. We have to face it down with principled stances, not with focus groups and triangulation. And as the left, we've got to be building power outside Parliament as well as within it. And that means resisting the attacks on working class communities and on our democratic rights. It means supporting workplace struggles, empowering trade unions, fighting for every single anti-union law to be repealed, standing against the policing bill, and standing shoulder to shoulder with all of the social movements that triggered the implementation of the policing bill in the first place, like Black Lives Matter, Extinction Rebellion. And Labour's power should never be confined to electoral cycles, because our party is only ever as strong as the movement that surrounds it, as our members, our trade unions, as the wider fight for social justice. You, everyone on this call, are the shoulders on which we as MPs stand. Thank you, and solidarity to you all.
Thank you very much, Nadia, and again for that reminder about how important our members are and our movement is to everything that we are trying to achieve. I'm just going to let everybody know about an event that is coming up. As you all know, the Labour National Women's Conference is coming up soon, and Arise are holding an event for the left slate for the Labour Women's Committee elections. It's going to be on Monday, the 17th of May at 7 p.m. And you've got some fantastic speakers from this meeting speaking, as well as an opportunity to introduce everybody to the 6 left candidates for the election to the Labour Women's Committee. I know that Diane, Apsana, Dawn, and Beth are all going to be speaking at this fantastic event. So hopefully there should be a link dropped in the chat now. It'd be great if you could register. It's so important that there are left voices right across our movement in every single section of the Labour Party. Now I'm going to go quickly on to our next speaker. And again, you're going to hear me say it again, another star of the 2019 intake. And she teaches me how to speak Welsh, or actually just not mess up my Welsh without knowing that she's doing it. Her name is Beth Winter, and she's the MP for Kinnan Valley.
Oh, thank you, Belle. Diolch yn fawr. It's such a pleasure to be here this evening. Now, the Welsh Parliament, the Senedd elections last Thursday were a significant victory for Welsh Labour, winning nearly 40% of the constituency vote and 36% of the regional vote, and increasing our representation in the Senedd to 30 seats, equal to our best previous result. And we said goodbye to Neil Hamilton and his like in the far-right parties. They now have no seats in the Senedd. Lessons can be learned from the success of Welsh Labour, which was underpinned by a commitment to the principles of social justice, equality and democracy. Much of this success is down to our First Minister, Mark Drakeford, whose careful and compassionate handling of the COVID pandemic. His honesty and directness has been extremely popular with people in Wales. His robust response to Boris Johnson's failings gave him additional stature. Our First Minister makes no secret of his left politics. He can be credited for coining the slogan, Crea Red Water, to describe the distinctive flavour to Welsh politics, particularly in relation to public ownership of public services during the Blair years. He supported Jeremy Corbyn in his leadership bid, and during the leadership election last year, called on the incoming Labour leader to, and I quote, retain our best ideas from the 2017 and 2019 manifestos to form the basis of the party's new policy agenda. Since the inception of devolution 20 years ago, Wales has always had a Labour-led government, and we've got much to be proud of. We've retained a largely publicly owned NHS and maintained free prescriptions. Our Wellbeing of Future Generations Act encouraged the bill allowing 16 and 17-year-olds to vote in Welsh elections, which happened for the first time last week. Wales is also developing an inclusive, largely foundational economy, promoting fair work and safeguarding workers' rights. Our Trade Union Wales Act 2017 gives further protection to workers in Wales in devolved sectors. The Welsh Labour manifesto for these elections contained important progressive commitments, including a guarantee of an offer of work, education, training or self-employment for young people, a national music service, we are the land of song after all, the real living wage for social care staff, enactment of the Social Partnership Bill, abolishing the use of single-use plastics, building 20,000 new low-carbon social homes for rent, reversing bus deregulation and strengthening Welsh devolution. Yet despite our progress, decades of underfunding and austerity continue to impact negatively on this good work. Child poverty remains a problem, particularly in constituencies like mine, Kinnan Valley, and the need for a Right to Food Act encompassing free school meals is as much needed in Wales as it is elsewhere in the UK. Our benefit system needs as much redesigning for the people of Wales as for the rest of the UK. We too require a redistribution of wealth. And beware of the effects of the end of furlough, uplift in universal credit and the ban on evictions later this year. Now, the Tories are determined to ride roughshod over the devolution settlement and re-centralise power in Westminster. And it comes as no surprise the Welsh Government has stated its intent to take legal action against the UK Government on the Internal Market Act. UK Government's attempts to bypass the Senate with a levelling up and community renewal funding further exposes that that's a contempt for devolution. The process is a complete shambles. Funding is limited, not properly targeted, excludes deprived areas and shows a complete lack of understanding of the real priorities for us here in Wales. While this Tory government is not a rerun of Cameron and Osborne, the damage that it's causing and is likely to cause is going to be significant. And I wonder if Boris thinks that maybe there isn't as much chance of being able to buy votes here in Wales. It is crucial that we unite across different regions, nations and backgrounds to work, in the words of Mark Drakeford, for a radical and ambitious policy agenda. Such things as fostering local activism, embedding ourselves in our communities with a bottom-up approach to our policies, developing socialist policies that end poverty and inequality, not Union Jacks, which do not represent Wales anyway, or attempts to outdo the Tories or regressive policies, or listen to the likes of Peter Mandelson. Secure the funding for our children and grandchildren with a green industrial revolution, and commit to greater devolution, to radical federalism. Greater devolution of power throughout the UK must be an integral part of the discussions on the left of the Labour Party and how we increase public and community involvement. We need to reach out across parties and engage with a diverse range of political, civic and progressive organisations to develop a new reform agenda for a future radical federal UK. Above all, we need a clear, transformative vision to take the fight to the Tories. We need to turn that clear red water into clear red action to give future generations across the UK a fairer, greener, socialist future. Let's make our politics meaningful to the people we serve. Let's look outside of that Westminster bubble with its meaningless and archaic practices, and let's do some politics. Solidarity. Diolch yn fawr.
Thank you very much, Beth, and thank you so much for reminding us what we can do when we have socialists in power somewhere in this country. We can achieve great things. So now we're going to go all the way from Wales, all the way to North London with Dawn Butler from Brent Central. Dawn?
Hey, Belle. Okay, hi, everyone. So this has been a great kind of empowering session. So thank the Socialist Campaign Group for putting it on and everybody that's spoken. And my plea today is a plea to the members. I want to say to the members, those who are thinking of leaving, please don't. This last election pass was really hard. It was a hard slog knocking on those doors without the enthusiasm that we saw in 2017 and the joy that we saw in 2019. At least we had that emphasis behind us as we were campaigning. So I want to say to people, please don't leave the party. Socialism isn't a bad word and it isn't a dirty word. And don't let anybody tell us that it is. If it wasn't for socialism, we wouldn't have had the rollout of the vaccinations that we've had at the moment, because that's done through the biggest socialist movement, the NHS, that our country's ever seen. So don't let anybody tell you that it's a bad or a dirty word, because it's not. Remember what good can come of it. And I say this, like, what would happen if we didn't have the NHS? People say, well, things would be worse if you were in government. Well, actually, it wouldn't have, would it? And we know that it wouldn't have. For a start, we've seen what's happened when the Conservatives are in government. We've seen what they've done with public funds. We've seen how much they've given to their mates. The Tory party will have no problems with getting money at the next election, because they've already paid for it with our money. We've seen £14 million go to paying for an app that was scrapped. Where did that money go? Billions of pounds have been given to the Conservative friends, their donors. They've got their money back tenfold, 20-fold. They're not stupid. So if we move away, if we walk away, we let them get away. And we can't afford to do that. People say the Labour Party is anti-business. I say, well, that's really strange, because in our manifesto, we were actually pro-business, but we were against bad businesses. What's wrong with fighting for people to have a living wage, a London living wage? What's wrong with fighting for people to have proper sick pay? What's wrong with fighting for people to have holiday pay? There's nothing wrong with that. What's wrong with saying the person at the very top of an organization shouldn't be paid 20 times more than the person at the bottom of the organization? What's wrong with that? There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with saying, look, if you're a millionaire at the top of your organization, why should the person at the bottom have to live in their car or go to food banks to be able to afford to eat? There's nothing wrong with saying we deserve better. There's nothing wrong with saying that if you haven't got a trade union recognition, then you won't get any government money. If that was the case, we wouldn't have seen billions of pounds go to Tory donors or Tory people. We wouldn't have seen that if the Labour Party was in power. So don't let people gaslight us into saying that things would have been worse if the Labour Party was in power, because it wouldn't have. We know it wouldn't have. And you know the other reason why we know it wouldn't have? Because they've adopted a lot of our policies from our manifesto they've adopted in government. So don't let them gaslight us and say that, because it just isn't true. And I want to say this, you know, they have money, but we normally have people. We have members. That's how we win. You know, we cannot part from what we were born from as the party. You try and separate us from the members, you destroy the Labour Party. You try and separate us from the trade union movement, you destroy the Labour Party. So unless you want to destroy the Labour Party, that talk needs to stop. So I say to the members, don't flinch. Don't go away, stay. Because it's our party. It's my party. I'm not going to let anyone take, I've worked bloody hard for this party. I'm not going to let anybody come and take my party away from me. I'm not going to let anyone take away the vision of what our country can look like from me, because we know that we can get our country on a better keel than it is at the moment. We know what the government's up to. We know that when the austerity kicks in, it's going to be harder and tougher than anything we've ever seen in our lives. We know that. And we've got to stand up against that. And I'll end on this, Bell. Sometimes I think about the fight that we had to have, like, the red flags, you know, sung at the end of the conference. And there's a verse in the red flag where it says, "It waved above our infant might when all ahead seemed dark as night. It witnessed many a deed and vow. We mustn't change its colour now. Keep the red flag flying here." Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dawn. And you're absolutely right, it is the party of members. And thinking of Labour Party conference, we'll just reiterate Dawn's point that if Socialists are not members of the Labour Party, we face a real challenge at Labour Party conference, ensuring that all of the policies that we worked so hard for over the past few years are maintained. It's so important that we do that. So don't leave. Stay and organise. Our next speaker is, this is our next speaker. Now, fun fact, Socialist Campaign Group actually has 3 MPs that studied at the University of Bradford. There's obviously something in the water, or at least the water is safer to drink in Bradford than it is in London. Our next speaker is Lloyd Russell-Moyle, and he's the MP for Brighton Kemp Town.
Well, yes, there clearly is something good in the water in Bradford, although the only other alumni who's an MP is Gavin Williamson, so I wouldn't suggest that we are immune even in Bradford from the odd person going wrong. But anyway, back to what we're meant to be talking about. Look, it has been an increasingly depressing week. Not just because of the results, because in many areas our results held up well. In many areas where we have strong socialists that stand by their principles, our results showed reward. But where we relied on a national message that is weak, the results, I'm afraid, were not good. And then what did our national leader do? He thought it would make sense on the very day the positive results came out to try and divide and conquer the party. And that's very clear what was attempted to happen. And the outrage from across the party meant he had to stop and think about what he was doing. The outrage across the party meant that he wasn't able to do his sweeping changes to even get rid of centre-left people from his cabinet. But let us be in no doubt. We continue down the road that we are. We will be a party at the next election with 150, 100 MPs. We will not be a party that is fit for government if we continue down the road we are. I sat through those PLP meetings where people would scream at Jeremy. They would scream at him that he had to personally intervene on anti-Semitism, and then when he did, of course, the report accused him of doing wrong. They screamed at him that he was going to lose their seats, but I'm afraid under the current leadership it's even worse. And they screamed irrationally at him for many other things. We shouldn't drop to their level. We shouldn't drop to that nastiness. But we should be clear. This party has to change direction drastically and radically quickly. We need to learn the lessons. We need to learn the lessons of where we did well. And we need to make sure that we embrace those issues. Because if we don't, the Labour Party will not be the party of change that we need to see. The Labour Party is meant to be the representation of the trade unions, socialist societies and socialist thinkers and cooperatives in Parliament. That's what it was founded for. It was not founded for a self-congratulatory club of careerists. It was not founded to make ourselves all feel better for liberals. It was founded to represent those three groups: organised workers in the trade unions, the socialist societies, whether they be the thinking socialists, the Christian socialists. Now, of course, we have Muslim socialist societies and Jewish socialist societies. And it was also founded for cooperatives who organise the economy along non-capitalist models. And we have to put forward those alternative visions and those alternative dreams. Because if we don't, no one else is going to come and do it for us. If we don't, no one else is going to be able to found a party that will be able to do it for us. It is only the Labour Party that has been able to achieve this broad coalition. And it is a broad coalition of people that you and I might disagree with sometimes. But without that broad coalition, we achieve nothing apart. We must work together in unity, but in determination. And I know that many of my friends, neighbours even, have been thinking about leaving the party. So I say to you, keep your skin in the game, because things will change and we will need you. We will need you to campaign for all these fantastic people that you are hearing tonight. We will need you to stop any of these fantastic people tonight being deselected by a right-wing coup of the Labour Party. But we will also need you out there campaigning and voting and making sure that Labour wins. Because when Labour doesn't win, neither do trade unions, neither do socialists. So thank you very much for coming along and listening, because we need to achieve those changes. And I want to finally just say two things. One is about youth work. Youth work in our country continues to be absolutely decimated by 10 years. 10 years of Conservative cuts. £1.5 billion now have been removed from youth services since the Conservatives took over. And only through campaigning and Labour councils have we managed to reverse that Only Labour councils have started to turn. And that's why, for young people and for those youth services, we need to get Labour councils elected up and down the country. And so we can't just bemoan those results last week. We need to make sure that we are starting to campaign now for 4 years' time, so we overturn those results. Thank you, comrades.
Thank you very much, Lloyd. Absolutely, the work begins now and the work begins here. We are, we're over halfway through and we still have a number of fantastic speakers to go. We have Ian Lavery MP, Claudia Webbe, Richard Burgon, and of course, Jeremy Corbyn. Our next speaker, however, people often say that she needs no introduction, but I'll tell you what the American civil rights leader Al Sharpton says about her. Whenever he comes to the UK, he's always asked, did you meet the Queen? Because you know the US are obsessed with our royal family. And he always says, yes, I make it a point to make sure I see Diane Abbott before I leave. Diane Abbott, Member of Parliament for Hackney North and Stoke Newington.
Thank you very much, Chair. Can you hear me?
I can indeed.
Very good. Well, thank you very much for inviting me to speak this evening. And we've had some fantastic speakers. But first of all, I want to state my solidarity with the people of Palestine. We mourn all of the dead, and our hearts are with all of the terrified children and families in the region tonight. But we also call for justice for the Palestinians. As Nelson Mandela said, we know too well that our freedom is incomplete without the freedom of the Palestinians. But sadly, we meet tonight in the wake of a series of defeats for the Labour movement in the UK. We were defeated in 2019. Jeremy Corbyn was removed as leader shortly afterwards, although some of us remain determined that he will have the whip restored. And now, last weekend, we had a string of defeats at local authority level, all over the country, including the Hartlepool by-election. And to add insult to injury, the leadership then pulled off a completely mismanaged reshuffle of Labour's shadow cabinet. Now, many of you will remember that when you had malicious forces on all sides, both in the media and in our own Labour Party, and they were ceaselessly trying to destroy our then leader, Jeremy Corbyn, they would say, with any other leader, we'd be 20 points ahead. Well, we're nothing like 20 points ahead, we're actually behind. And as I said last week, we lost all of those council seats. And in Hartlepool, we had our party's worst result there since the Second World War, with our lowest share of the vote in that time too. And it's worth saying, even though we lost Hartlepool this time, under Jeremy's leadership, we had a much larger share of the vote. What I suppose I should say is that to have any hope of forming the next government, we must win back a huge number of parliamentary seats. Even if we won all 31 of the so-called red wall seats.
So I think we've lost Diane on the call. So we are going to go into our next speaker, and hopefully maybe she can join us again. Our next speaker is Ian Lavery, MP, and he's the Member of Parliament for Wansbeck. Ian?
We won't need the link for him. Well, you can shout.
Ian?
Hello, thank you very much. Listen, it's an absolute pleasure to be on the panel tonight. It's always a pleasure to be in the company of such esteemed colleagues on the Socialist campaign group. It's absolutely fantastic. And you know, sometimes people are up to criticising what we are doing. Let me tell you, we've been doing a lot of very, very important work in the main, supporting Jeremy Corbyn in the situation that Jeremy continues to face. The Labour Party is nothing if it hasn't got this fantastic relationship with the trade unions. The trade union movement and the Labour Party are one and the same organisation. I think it was Dawn who said, we fail if one of the organs fails itself. But you know, I'm going to be brutally honest tonight, as I normally am. Has there ever in the history of the Labour and trade union movement been a need for a united left? In my view, the answer is no. We've got huge issues with a fractured left, and we cannot win anything. We cannot win anything unless we work as one unit. There's the famous banners there. United we stand, divided we fall. Unity is strength. Comrades, like it or not, that's the truth. Now, a number of people have been on here tonight speaking, saying exactly the same thing. Don't leave the party. Because you know what it means if you leave the party? It means, quite simply, you're leaving the field of battle. You're leaving those behind to fight the battle on your behalf whilst you cheer from the sidelines. You're weakening the people who need to be fighting. You weaken and dilute the influence and the power and the confidence, of course, of the people who are left behind. A message, a clear-cut message. If you've left the party, get back in. If you're thinking of leaving the party, don't. You know, we've got to just put things into context in our community. And the fact is that socialism wasn't born in 2015. It was born centuries ago. Think of the Tolpuddle Martyrs and the trade unionists of the time. Think of the people who established the Labour Party in 1927 February 1900. You know, we actually stand on the shoulders of giants, and we should be proud to do that, but not looking to jump off and run away. We should be proud, and we should be continuing the fight. A lot of people paid the ultimate sacrifice. We need to be continuing that battle. It isn't called the struggle for nothing, and it's very, very difficult. We see now when we actually got there with JC, who's the last speaker tonight, fantastic leader of the Labour Party, the best leader of the party we've ever had, a gentleman, somebody with honesty and integrity, and somebody who had a vision which would support communities the length and the breadth of this country. You know what? We nearly won it in 2017. There's another argument. I think it's probably embedded somewhere in something called the Ford inquiry. Listen, we nearly won the election. Jeremy nearly had number 10 key on his key ring, for heaven's sake. Then we should understand and recognise that only 5 years before that, we would never have envisaged having that opportunity. So there's always hope. There's always hope, and there should always be hope. Never give in. Because if we're fighting for a better brighter, fairer, more just society, a better life for people in our communities. It's not going to be easy, because those at the top, the establishment, the media, want the they want the money, they want the power, they want the influence for themselves. They'll resist in whatever way we can. But never underestimate what we actually achieved with Jeremy. Now, we frightened the establishment witless, and that's why we got, and Jeremy in particular, John, Diane, and others. That's why we were feared so much. But there's things happening, colleagues, comrades, friends, brothers and sisters. There's things happening as we speak. The left's in a stronger position than what we were, say, last Wednesday, for obvious reasons. Things happen in politics. I think it was Macmillan who said, events, dear boys, events. And events change things. So we've got to be ready. We've got to have a vision for the left. And we should, as I say, never underestimate what we achieved. But we've got to be positive. Comrades, we've got a vision. We've got to establish something which people can understand, that it doesn't have to be this way. Instead of navel gazing and fighting within factions on the left, we need to come together as one solid unit, and we will not be defeated. Don't mourn, organise, get together, and we can achieve anything. Believe me. And as I say, things are happening. Events, dear boys, events. We need a left vision. We need to provide a clear, cross-generation vision. We need to banish austerity. We need to base our vision, clear. It's been laid out in 2017 and 2019. Never mind what people tell you we offer too much and it was a wish list. Let me tell you, no apologies at all for the fantastic array of policies in 2017 and 2019. And if people are seriously suggesting that the way forward for the Labour Party is to withdraw, giving people hope, giving people some sort of aspirations in the future, that's the way to win an election. Absolute nonsense. We had a fine array of policies in 2017, 2019. It's something that we need to build on. And I'll tell you something, the narrative of the Labour Party shouldn't be the Labour Party when it was for the many, not the few. Now it's under new leadership. What that means is, comrades, is I'm not Jeremy Corbyn. Well, that's such a shame that I'm not Jeremy Corbyn. But knocking on somebody's door, trying to win an election, trying to build a better future for people in our communities, trying to build a better future for people in the workplace, will not be won by telling people constantly, I'm not Jeremy Corbyn. In fact, it acts adversely, in my opinion. So we've got to have this passionate message, standing up for the dispossessed, the disenfranchised. Because what we did say in 2017, 2019, we wanted an increase in NHS spending. You'll get that with a socialist government. We wanted to raise the minimum wage of up to £10. You'll get that. And it was fully supported by the electorate. Tax rises for those making more than £80,000 a year. What's wrong with that? 150,000 council homes. What's wrong with that? A green industrial revolution, which has been mentioned earlier by a number of speakers, so essential no matter what happens. There's not going to be a vaccination against climate change, let me tell you. So if we don't address it, huge problems. We've got lots of issues, lots of policies. And remember the policy that McDonnell come up with, free broadband. Some communist that was attached to it. Hey, listen, it's one of the best policies that we've ever had in this country. It's now being embraced by everybody, by the Labour Party themselves. Colleagues, listen, I've said it before and I'll say it again. Nothing happens, Lenin quote, by the way, nothing happens in decades. And decades happen in weeks. And there's things happening in this moment in time. So we need to continue to to press on. If we're serious about transforming people's lives, let's get back to where we were. Stop the tears. Stop crying into a beer. Be authentic. Look at what we've got to offer. Build on that offer. Give the message of hope to like the thousands and thousands and hundreds of thousands of people in there who are desperate for change. And I think a number of other speakers have said the same. There's lots of Labour voters out there, but a lot of them didn't go to the ballot box on this occasion. That needs to change. We've got a huge job to do, comrades, massive job to do. But if you're not up for it, well, that's a bit of a shame, because I think we can change the world. If you don't get up every morning thinking that you can change the world, you need to think that you can change the world. Believe me, it's inspiring. We've got a huge job to do. I'm not sure if it's this mountain to climb, by the way, but we've got this huge job to do, as socialists, as comrades within the Labour Party. It's not called the struggle for nothing. Comrades, the past we inherit, the future we build. Solidarity.
Thank you, Ian. Thank you. That was absolutely fantastic. And we all know that it's so important that people are staying in our party, organising, and I'm so glad that we had nearly 3,000 people that heard that important message, watching us on Zoom, Facebook and YouTube, all across all of those platforms. That's fantastic. We're going to go straight on to our next speaker. And this is the final time you're going to hear me say this evening, I promise. Another star of the 2019 intake, Claudia Webbe MP, who is the member for Leicester East.
Thank you so much, Belle, and I hope you can hear me. Yes, my name is Claudia Webbe, and I'm proudly the Member of Parliament for Leicester East here in my home city of Leicester. And it's a pleasure to join you all today at a crucial time for our movement, and it is an honour. It's an honour to speak alongside fellow Socialist Campaign Group MPs. I wish that more MPs understood that our role in Parliament is not to mediate an unjust system, but to transform it. The last week has been incredibly difficult for those of us who are fighting for a socialist future. Yet I remain incredibly proud that in recent years, the left has rediscovered its socialist roots, won the argument against austerity, and developed a platform of policies that will put people and planet before private profit. I believe that going forward, for socialists to win power, we must remain committed to outlining a clear, radical vision for a fairer and better society. Returning to the failed moderation and triangulation of the past will not only hinder us in challenging the Tories and their reactionary divisive agenda, but could also lead us alienating much of our key supporters. Policies such as a radical Green New Deal, scrapping universal credit and extending public ownership are popular and should be maintained and developed. We will not win by rolling back on this transformative agenda. Instead, we must develop and popularize it, showing how real change is possible and that we can transform the lives of the majority for the better. We must stop making excuses for billionaires. A wealth tax could not come any sooner than now. The billionaire press will never be on our side. We need to democratize and diversify our media. Our public ownership policies were indeed deeply popular. A clear majority of the British public believed that services essential to human life should be run in the public interest, not for private profit. We must reject the voices of the powerful telling us that the bitterly disappointing local election results last week mean that we must tack to the right. Because if we look across the world, we see the rise of right-wing populism claiming the centre ground, middle of the road approach to politics. Our work is international. Never again must we stand idly by whilst African American women, men and children are gunned down by uniformed officers of the state, or where elderly Indian farmers are beaten to an inch of their lives simply for organising a national strike against repressive laws that would see the corporate takeover of their farms, or in Brazil where the indigenous people of the Amazon are being raped of their land for mining, or where Palestinians are brutally attacked and illegally evicted from their homes and ridiculed, whilst peaceful worshippers fasting in the month of Ramadan are set upon with rubber bullets, tear gas and grenades, and where children are killed in Gaza. Palestine has the right to exist. We must not be silent or be silenced. Our role is side by side with those who are oppressed at home and abroad. Yes, we need to lead the resistance to the Tories in Parliament and in the council chamber. But just as importantly, we need to do this on the picket lines and in the workplace by supporting trade unions and standing by all who are under attack from this government, especially after they refused to abolish the disgraceful fire and hire practices in this week's Queen's speech. We must also give full support to all those young people and others who continue to engage in direct action to highlight racial inequalities and the need for Black liberation and to tackle the climate emergency, whilst also building support for a Green New Deal and socialist solutions to climate breakdown. The climate crisis lays bare the delusion of moderate politics being the safe, sensible option. Only rapid, radical collective action will give us a chance of defending vulnerable communities in the global south and allow our children to inherit a livable planet. With Boris Johnson governing with an authoritarian Thatcherite agenda that is clouded in the rhetoric of levelling up and the gleeful embrace of racist culture wars and the politics of division, it is vital that we do not compromise our anti-racist and internationalist principles. It is up to all of us who believe in a better, fairer world to stand against those who wish to pit communities against each other so that they can preserve an unjust economic system. The crisis we face require radical solutions because we stand on a cliff edge in which the crisis of climate breakdown, rampant inequality, and the shockingly uneven distribution of wealth seem irreversible. Yet, as socialists, we know there is an alternative, that it is possible to build a society around the needs of all its citizens and the principles of solidarity. The road ahead looks long and dark, but if we can go down it together, we can and we will build a society that works in the interest of all of us, not just a privileged few. Because when we work together, stand together, there is nothing we cannot accomplish. It's up to all of us to fight for that better world. So solidarity, my friends, solidarity.
Thank you very much, Claudia, and we should never ever stop fighting for that better world. So next, we are going to go straight to our next speaker because we are doing quite well for time. Thank you, everybody that is still watching. So, Socialist Campaign Group has 5 different officers, but the officer that makes sure that all of the wheels on our bus continue to go round and round is our secretary, who is Richard Burgon, Member of Parliament for Leeds East.
Well, thanks very much, Bal, and it's great that so many people on this call. And can I just start by offering my support to the Palestinian people? Tonight's meeting is focused on getting our party back on the right track. But we're part of wider struggles for justice, human rights and peace. So we've got a duty to speak out to end the illegal occupation of Palestine, which Human Rights Watch has declared to be apartheid. Last week's results showed that we're going backwards in areas we must regain to form the next government. With a general election likely in just 2 years, we need to quickly learn the lessons. These defeats are the result of the leadership's failed strategy. Let's not forget, we won in Hartlepool, not just in 2017, but in 2019 too. So how do we get out this mess? The first job of any opposition is to oppose. Now, I shouldn't have to say that. The one thing that unites all Labour members is a passionate hatred of the Tory party and what it stands for. It's in our DNA that you fight the Tories 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 52 weeks a year. And when it's a leap year, you're delighted that you've got one extra day to fight that Tory party. But in the past year, Labour's leadership has treated the government with kid gloves. The Tories have been let off the hook for their disastrous COVID response. And as Bob Crow said, if you fight, you don't always win. But if you don't fight, you will always lose. And you need a vision. You need a vision. But in this election campaign, it just wasn't clear what the party stood for. I had activists on the phone, frustrated, upset, demoralised that they didn't have a clue what we were campaigning on. That was completely unnecessary. Our party has the popular policies needed to rebuild support. In poll after poll, they're backed by a large majority of voters. So it was a political decision, not an electoral decision to ditch those popular policies. And whichever person called Peter Mandelson persuaded the leadership to drop those policies, well, they played a central role in this defeat. I don't think Mandelson cares if we win or cares if we lose. I think Mandelson cares about winning the internal war against the left and nothing more. And solidarity to Len McCluskey and Mick Whelan, two great trade union leaders who Peter Mandelson has attacked today. So Keir should start championing our popular policies, as he said he would when standing for leader. And Keir should boot out Mandelson from whatever role he has, formal or informal. Labour needs to spell out what it stands for. And here, the wind should be in Labour's sails. Even the Tories have had to adopt the language of levelling up and building back better. Now, of course, we know it's empty rhetoric, but that creates a space for us to lay out what it should look like. The answers can be found in our last manifestos. Free school meals for all primary school children, big investment in rebuilding public services, free social care, hundreds of thousands of good jobs through a People's Green New Deal that triggers a green industrial revolution, dignity at work through a £10 an hour minimum wage and an end to 0 hours contracts, a pay rise for all workers, including 15% for our NHS staff, and so much more. And if a centrist US president can announce massive investment in green energy, in modern transport, in health and social care, in social security, if a centrist US president can announce taxes on the super rich to fund this, well, then that's the very least that the Labour Party leadership needs to be fighting for. But instead, we've been reduced to nothing more than shallow flag waving, photos of eating fish and chips, and photos of drinking pints of beer. People see through it, and ditching our policies is hitting us right across the political spectrum. We're losing votes on all sides. People staying at home, people voting for other parties posing as progressive, and others going to the Tories. Take Hartlepool, for example. We won it with 53% in 2017. Since 2017, the Tories have only gained 300 votes in Hartlepool. Labour has lost 12,000 votes in Hartlepool. This wasn't a Tory landslide, this was a Labour collapse. Across the country, ditching our popular policies means we've nothing to say to those who voted Tory. It also means many of those who voted for us in the disastrous 2019 Brexit election are going to the Greens and other so-called progressive parties. In some areas, a small shift in our vote to the Greens will mean seat losses. Look, for example, at what happened in Sheffield. Look, for example, what happened in Bristol. We simply can't afford to take those voters for granted. Now, in the US, Biden has sought a constructive relationship with progressives in his party, and he's adopted many of their big policy ideas. Now, in contrast, the current Labour leadership has waged war on the left to show that Labour is under new management, denying Jeremy the whip, suspending good Labour activists for no good reason. That approach has failed. Labour can't go on as we are. The leadership urgently needs to change direction. But if Keir continues to not implement his campaign pledges, if he continues to foster disunity, well, he'll continue to lose, and then politics will take its inevitable course. So that's my advice to the leadership. But of course, politics isn't a debating club. It's about organisation as well as about ideas. So there is no point in us just recommending that the leadership takes a path. We have to force it to take a path. And that means unity. Unity between the left in the Labour Party, the left in the constituencies, and the left in the trade union movement, campaigning together to force that necessary change in direction. And reflecting on what we need to do, reflecting on the duty that we now have. I want to finish on the words of Keir Hardie, Labour's first party leader and a beacon of hope in the world in which he lived. Keir Hardie said, and I quote, "I have contempt for the men who, knowing what should be done, are yet afraid to proclaim it from the housetops if need be. It is a half-heartedness of the present leaders which keeps our cause from progressing." The words of Keir Hardie. And that's a challenge, ringing down the years to all of us from our founding leader. So as a movement, let's ensure we're not half-hearted, but are courageous. Let's ensure our cause progresses, not stalls. Let's ensure that we are a movement that our founder, Keir Hardie, wouldn't feel dispirited by as his legacy, but would be proud of and would be inspired by. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Richard, for that fantastic speech, as well as keeping the SCG wheels going round and round. We're going to come back to Diane Abbott. We had some technical issues earlier. Diane?
Can you hear me, Chair?
I can.
Very good. Sorry about the technical problems earlier. As I was saying, thank you for inviting me to speak this evening. And first of all, what I would like to say is to offer my solidarity to the people of Palestine. We all mourn the dead, and our hearts go out to all the terrified children and families in the region tonight. But we also call for justice for the Palestinians. As Nelson Mandela once said, we know too well that our freedom is incomplete without the freedom of the Palestinians. Sadly, we meet at this rally in the wake of a series of defeats. We were defeated in 2019. Jeremy Corbyn, who you're going to hear from later, was removed as leader shortly afterwards the 2019 election. Although many of us are determined that he will have the whip restored, And now we had the results of last week's elections, including the Hartlepool by-election. And then, to add insult to injury, we had a completely mismanaged reshuffle of Labour's shadow cabinet. Some of you will remember that when malicious forces, both in the media and in our own party, were ceaselessly trying to destroy our then leader Jeremy and his socialist project, they would say that, I quote, with any other leader, we would be 20 points ahead, close quotes. But we're not 20 points ahead, we're behind, and we had those bad results in council seats all over the country. And in Hartlepool, we had our party's worst result there since the Second World War, with our lowest share of the vote in that time too. And goodness knows what's going to happen in Batley and Spen. So in order to have any hope of forming the next government, which we have to do, not just for the benefit of Labour supporters, but for to offer the country any hope, but to have a chance of forming the next government, we have to win back a very large number of seats. Because even if we won all of the 31 so-called red wall seats in the North and the Midlands, that would not be enough to form a government. The Tories have an 80-seat majority, and we know, some of us, that they can often rely on the reactionary instincts of other parties to get their programme through. And we've seen this in recent years with both the DUP and the Lib Dems. So how did it come to this? Well, we could see this defeat coming, even if the scale of it was a surprise. And it's also quite clear when the rot set in. The Tory press have not turned on Keir the way they turned on Jeremy, and I hope for Keir's sake that they never do. But having enjoyed a honeymoon period after becoming leader, and with endless praise from right-wing media pundits for how forensic he was, Keir stopped rising in the polls in September last year and started falling almost immediately. But what happened in September? Schools reopened. Now, the school unions and scientists said it was premature to reopen them, but Keir was demanding a no ifs, no buts return to school. And voters do notice if you are supporting a government or even urging it onwards when it is pursuing policies that are allowing tens of thousands of people to die. That is a first impression that is not easily changed, because more people died in that second coronavirus wave when the schools were reopened than died in the first. And when people said they weren't sure, and are saying now they're not sure what Keir stands for, part of the problem may be there was a point when he seemed to be supporting the Tory government and their coronavirus strategy, when their coronavirus strategy was clearly at fault. But we must listen. And we have to address where we are now. Many colleagues on the right of the party are saying we need to listen to voters. Absolutely. But we're saying at this rally, listening to the voters is not the same thing as listening to the Tory supporting press. And it doesn't mean listening to antisocial, quote unquote, moderate pundits either. And it doesn't mean listening to focus group when you already know what you're going to say they said, because this is what happened in the New Labour years. And the kind of focus groups the leadership are listening to now are run by the sort of people and coming up with the sort of conclusions which we heard so much of in the Blair years. I would say that we should certainly listen but listening must be based on evidence. There was a poll that was drawn up for Channel 4 News, and they asked all voters to please name the single reason why you didn't vote Labour in Hartlepool. And do you know what they found? The top two answers for not voting Labour in Hartlepool was first, Keir Starmer, and second was, do not agree with the policies or the policies aren't clear enough. Taken together, these two answers alone account for 1/4 of all the people who didn't vote for us. But do you know how many of them cited Brexit? Just 2%. And do you know how many people cited Jeremy Corbyn as their reason for not voting for us? None. 0%. And do you know how many voters cited bad immigration policies as a reason for not voting to us? It was also 0%. It was also none. The truth is, we don't usually lose votes to the Tories. It's quite a journey to go from Labour to Tory. We know some ex-Labour colleagues have made that journey, but for ordinary people, it's not a usual change of allegiance. Much more usual is that the Labour Party loses people to disillusion and demoralisation. Our vote in Hartlepool almost halved from 2019, and those Labour voters largely stayed at home. And this tells us something very important. It means it's possible to come back quickly, not just in Hartlepool, but in all the places we need to win. Apart from anything else, we can't write off large parts of the north of England or the Midlands or Scotland or anywhere. We need to win to form a government. What we clearly need, as other people have said at this rally, is the policies and the style of leadership that genuinely enthuses ordinary working people, whether in Hackney or Hartlepool. If all we do is define ourselves by what we are against, whether it's immigration or foreigners or so-called scroungers, it's not only morally bankrupt, but it also enthuses no one. And as for Peter Mandelson, who is trying to say that we need to weaken our ties to the trade unions and elections are one in the middle. Elections are not one in the middle. Older voters don't count for more than younger ones. And Black and Asian voters don't have to vote for the Labour Party because, as New Labour used to say about working people generally, they have, quote unquote, nowhere else to go. Black and Asian voters can stay at home too, and many of them do if they are faced with greater deaths under COVID, greater unemployment, bigger pay cuts, more stop and search, and no resolution of either the Grenfell or the Windrush scandals, while the Labour front bench is saying very little to defend them. And on young people, Jeremy Corbyn changed the electoral maths. We won over very many young people and they voted for us. Now we stay nothing and they stay at home or they vote Green. Remember, we lost Bristol, which was a very strong part of the country for Labour under Jeremy Corbyn. We lost Bristol to the Greens. And as well as listening, and not just to centrist pundits, we need to learn from our enemies. And I can tell you one person who doesn't believe you win elections from the centre. Boris Johnson doesn't. He won by shifting to the right. And we now have a Tory government that Enoch Powell would be proud of, which commissioned an inquiry with a hand-picked panel which claims there is no such thing as systematic racism, no such thing as the racism which Macpherson spoke about, and we can see in so many of our institutions. So This government, this Boris Johnson government, has driven down the wages of half-wage workers. It is mounting attacks on Black and Asian people. And as I've already mentioned, it gives no hope to young people. It's shoveling public money to the private sector, and in particular, showering contracts to their dodgy mates. Why did the test and trace program go so badly? Because it was given to the private sector. Why has the unrolling of vaccination gone so well? Because it was driven by our National Health Service. And just in case anybody wants to protest this state of affairs, the dodgy contracts, or the sleaze, Boris's government is adopting authoritarian laws which will free itself from the courts and imprison us if we protest. We can win again, but we can only win if we return to the idea that we need to stand up for working people and to stand up for all of those who are victims of the unfairness, inequality, and divisions in the society. We need to build on our popular policies, not junk them, as some people are saying. We need to stand for liberty and oppose a clampdown on our civil liberties. We need to stand for peace in the Middle East and worldwide. We shouldn't be standing for warmongering. Above all, we must remember who we are and what we stand for. And we must never forget that a better world is possible. Jeremy Corbyn's leadership showed us that possibility, and we need to build on his achievements and move forward as a party. Solidarity.
Thank you very much, Diane, and thank you for doing some of my work for me, because our next speaker is actually Jeremy Corbyn. And the only thing I would add to those wise words, Diane, is just reiterating what we've heard before throughout this call. Socialist campaign groups stand in absolute solidarity with Jeremy Corbyn, and we demand that the whip be restored to Jeremy. Jeremy is a long-time Labour Party member. He is our former leader. He led us through the last 5 years in such a fantastic way, taking the party back to our socialist principles, making sure we were that member-led party that we needed to be.
They don't want to talk about Palestine.
Pleased to introduce to you Jeremy Corbyn MP.
Thank you very much, Belle. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can.
Good, because I've had some technical problems here. Diane's had technical problems, so we've now concluded it's something to do with Virgin Media in North London, as she's a neighbouring constituency. So we're blaming the private sector. Is that agreed, Diane? Belle, thank you very much, and thank you for all the fantastic work you do as secretary of the Socialist Campaign Group. And you've got the greatest voting record of anybody ever, since you're a proxy for most of us in all the divisions that take place during the corona crisis. And thank you for what you just said in introducing me to speak, that I joined the Labour Party in 1966, before even England won the World Cup. And I've campaigned and fought in every election since that time. And I've been a candidate or an agent in most of those since 1970. And I have to say, I find the approach being taken towards me offensive in the extreme. I've given my life to socialism and this party, and I'll give the rest of my life to socialism because I want to see a decent world and a fairer world. That is what we are all about. And there's some wonderful people, not just the speakers on this call, but people that have joined us this evening to listen to what we have to say. There are, I understand, over 3,000 people that have come on it from various platforms. And I was looking through some of the points that have been made by people there. And I say to Nina Davis in Spain, yes, you are very welcome, despite living in Spain, or because you live in Spain, as part of Labour International. So bienvenidos. And there are many others on the call. And I want to say welcome to my great friend Remy Capo for the books he's written on the slave trade and the way in which he has brought a literary skill to making history readable, doable, and understandable through his fantastic trilogy. Because our movement is not just about economics and social policy and how many houses we build and all the other things. It's also about unleashing the artistic, the creative, and the imaginative in young people. And so I was proud of what we had in our manifesto, proud of the achievements we'd made in democratizing policy making within the party, and proud that under us, every child would have had access to music, to art. And I can absolutely promise you this: a government led by us, every child would have had a computer pronto in order to get through the COVID crisis. And the idea that Britain should be run by food banks, which is really what the Tory solution is disgusting and disgraceful. And Ian's campaign of the right to food is absolutely brilliant, because it is about the right of people to be able to eat properly and live properly. And as a group, we've put forward an alternative Queen's Speech, the kind of program, legislative program, that we would have done post-COVID. Post-COVID, recognizing that this country was deeply unequal before the corona crisis came in the early part of 2020. Just think back to those days. John McDonnell demanding the furlough scheme. Our shadow cabinet, within a few days of the coronavirus being named, had already set up an emergency subcommittee to deal with the coordination of all the strategies surrounding the corona crisis. And when we went to meet the government, what were they telling us? Lectures about herd immunity, lectures of nonsensical proportions about how this issue would be dealt with. And so the idea that Boris Johnson and someone other got us out of the corona crisis is such a load of nonsense. But we have a pliant, compliant, obsequious mainstream media that ignored all of that and just carried on supporting the government. And unfortunately, in Parliament, we have not been holding the government to account in the way that we should have done. The corona crisis has been an open sesame for Tory party donating companies to get government contracts to deal with corona. It is absurd and obscene what has been happening, and it's up to us to do something about it. But also remember that the Tory message is quite a clever one, because whilst Boris Johnson debated with me in Sheffield during the 2019 general election, I said, and I produced the documents, that the private sector health deals with the USA would take over our NHS because they would do a deal with them. He said it's complete nonsense. Last month, I was on a demonstration outside the offices of Centen, an American company that has already taken over 44 GP practices across this country, and there's many more where they came from. And I said that they would leave this country with more inequality, not less. Yes, they have spent a great deal of money. I don't object to putting money into supporting jobs and businesses. I do object when there is no public interest that accompanies it. So if we put money into supporting a big private sector company, then we take equity in that company as well, as John McDonnell was pointing out, and that we empower people, not disempower them. But this government is boldly going along with pork barrel politics in constituencies represented by newly elected Tory MPs, and at the same time promoting austerity and internal markets in local government and the health service, and underfunding pay so that public sector pay workers, particularly all those health workers that were clapped by Boris Johnson, are now getting effectively a pay cut. And so our job, surely, is to recognise the society in which we live. But I'll tell you this, the corona crisis has created big changes within our society. Those millennials that have moved into mainly the urban areas, the inner city urban areas of all the big cities of Britain, thought they had it made. They were young people, they were graduates, they were on an escalator of jobs and so on. They then discovered two things. One is the private rented sector is brutal. Rents are very high, security is very low, and conditions in those flats are very poor. And the possibility of buying anywhere is a pipe dream, and the possibility of getting social rented impossible because of the shortage of supply. And when they're put on furlough or lost their jobs altogether, many of them joined mutual aid groups and found themselves delivering food on behalf of food hubs and food banks. That sense of solidarity and that experience is not going to go away. There's a political lesson there that will be around for a very long time to come, of that sense of solidarity between all our communities. There's also the mental health crisis. And it is profound, deep, and serious, because there was a mental health crisis before Corona, and it's got worse, because it's all very well being told to work at home. If you've got a semi-detached house with a big garden, all the kids have got their own bedroom, and you've got your own study, you've got a big living room, and it's not nice being stuck at home, but it's not that bad. But if you're on an estate in my constituency, or Diane's or Ian's or anybody else's, and you've got 3 kids in a 1-bedroom flat, and you're all trying to study or work from home, it is impossible. It's working class kids in the worst housing, in the poorest areas of the country, that have suffered the most, the people that have suffered the most, the educational achievements that have suffered the most, and the mental health that's got the worst as a result of it. It's up to us to point all that out and campaign very strongly for something very, very different. There's also an international dimension to this. The international dimension is that the corona crisis knows no boundaries. It's a pandemic. It's a global pandemic. Johnson started off condemning the World Health Organization and joined in Trump and others in condemning it. They've since rode back a bit from that. But the World Health Organization is still chronically underfunded, and its demand for access to universal free healthcare across the globe is largely ignored. And some of our overseas aid does not promote free healthcare, indeed encourages the privatization of public services in different parts of the world. And so it is up to us to work globally and internationally and challenge the so-called security review the government has done. Security is security from poverty, is security from hunger, is security from disaster, is the ability of your children to grow up and get healthcare and education. That's what real security is. But what are we doing? Spending £24 billion more on so-called defence, refusing to join in the majority of the countries of the world in making nuclear weapons illegal, and cutting overseas aid at the same time, and promoting a Cold War with China. I want human rights for everybody in every country all around the world. And I want to see a foreign policy based on peace, on justice, and on human rights. But also recognizing there are 80 million people around the world who are refugees, either internally displaced people or refugees. They are victims of wars, of Afghanistan, of Iraq, of the military coup in Myanmar, and so many other places. They have to be given a voice. And the Project for Peace and Justice that I am proud to have founded last year has arranged on the 22nd of May for a global call for refugees from all over the world to have their voice heard. It'll be a massive event online, obviously, from all around the world. You'll hear refugee voices from all those places. They're human beings, just like all of us on this call, who want a place of safety. They don't need Priti Patel condemning them. They don't need the Navy in the Channel. They need a safe place to go. And it's not about prosecuting people traffickers. This is about not recognizing the causes of people seeking asylum in the first place. And so Our international solidarity is with the farmers in India. 250 million people took strike action, 1 in 30 of the world's population, to oppose globalization of Indian agriculture and the attacks on traditional farming practices and the handing over to Monsanto and other companies of the patents on plants and other things. And so that is what that strike was about. And I think it's emblematic of the movements around the world. So when you feel down and when you feel isolated and you think, well, God, nobody cares, nobody's interested, think of those people struggling for decent housing, food, and all the other issues in this country. Think of Indian farmers. Think of people in Colombia who have done their best to bring about a peace from the terrible civil war period, but now find there's an economic war being waged against the poorest people in Colombia. And we send our absolute support and solidarity to them. I noticed there was a message from Samuel Francis on the call list. And what he said was, it's all very well opposing, but what are you saying positively for the future? It's a good question, and it's a very fair question that he's asked. It's a good question because we cannot just be against things. We have to be for things. This is a rally for socialism. We are a group for socialism. We have to define what it means. It means never passing by on the other side to poverty, discrimination. It means standing up for causes, be they popular or not popular. It means standing with people in whatever situation they're facing when they're struggling against it. But it's also about ensuring we are demanding public ownership of rail, mail and water. We're demanding a fully funded and publicly owned National Health Service. We're demanding the end of student fees and universal free education for all. We're demanding a national care service, not the atomized private sector care service that we've got at the present time. And I can see Bell becoming concerned. So I really am, Bell, about to finish. It's okay. And I've had a message from across the other side of this room from my nearest and dearest telling me to wind up. And that I will now do. I just want to say this. Our solidarity is with people in struggle. Our imagination is there. The way forward for our group is at the grassroots. Is at the grassroots. Those green industrial revolution roundtables. Those people that have a real vision of what COP26 can achieve. Those young people that understand you cannot ignore the environmental crisis, but you cannot lecture people that there's a way around it and there's going to be hardship involved. The hardship has to be through the redistribution of wealth and power from the very wealthiest to the rest of the community and defending jobs in the process. So that is, I believe, our way forward. I just want to say, personal note, I was very proud to lead our party from 2015 to 2020. Mistakes, I'm with Frank Sinatra on that. Regrets, I'm with Frank Sinatra on that. But I tell you this, we recruited a lot of members. We changed the political culture within our society. And when Ian Lavery was talking about the policies we achieved, big thanks to Ian, to John, to Diane, to everybody else on this call for what they did. But nothing is over. None of us are walking away from any struggle. We're walking to the struggle. And so when people stand up, they get the rewards. Why did we achieve such great election results in Salford and in Preston and in Wales, so many other places, where there was a defining moment where people were seen to stand up? When you're seen just to walk away from the battle and not oppose, where's the enthusiasm there? So COVID ends this year. We're back out on the road with the local meetings, the public meetings, the demonstrations. The history of our movement goes through our very veins. And the hope is there for a world of peace, of justice, of human rights, of sustainability. It's called socialism. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jeremy, and thank you so much for everything you've done, everything you continue to do. I have to say, I was so proud to stand as a member of Parliament on the 2019 manifesto. And I know that we all were, and we all know fantastic work that went into it. And as you said, it's always time for socialism, and I cannot wait to see what we can achieve in the coming years and months. I want to thank all of our speakers, all of the members of Parliament in the Socialist campaign group that have spoken today. They've been absolutely fantastic, and they continue to do so. They continue to stand up for all of these different policies that we know are so popular right across the country, and they do it, with not much love and against a barrage of everything else. And what I would say is, have a look at the work that Socialist Campaign Group have been doing. Have a look at the Alternative Queen's Speech. Have a look at the pamphlet that really outlines our views on what should be what is a vision for this country, and continue to engage with our work in that way, but also as you've heard again and again, stay members of the Labour Party, keep building our movement. Not so long ago, I was feeling quite down in the dumps about everything. We get up all the time as MPs, particularly Socialist MPs. We make loads of noises about different things, and with the Tories' overwhelming majority, we often lose. And that can be really disheartening. But I remember on one day feeling, particularly down. And then I heard about the fantastic news of the Shrewsbury picketers' victory. And that really lifted me up, because as Comrade Ian Lavery always said, it's not called the struggle for nothing. And we've got to keep fighting. And that's so important. In our numbers, we can achieve so much. And we've shown that even with really devastating results in this country, we've shown what we can achieve in areas where we are promoting socialism, where we are standing firm on those values. And what I would say to everybody is make sure that you're following the Socialist Campaign Group on Twitter. Make sure that, when you are feeling down the dumps, as I have been, that you can watch this video back. We are going to be sharing the full content right across social media, and you can share it with all of your colleagues, comrades, and friends too. And most importantly, remember, whilst things might be bad at the moment, we have a movement that is worth fighting for, and that ye are the many and they are the few. Have a very good evening, everybody, and thank you so much for being with us tonight.